Good morning, everyone. Hi, thanks for bearing with me if you've been trying to get onto this live feed. Had a few technical difficulties at home this morning. And I don't know about you, as we've talked about on this show before, though, we're being thrown curveballs every single day. So we're just rolling with it and doing our best and trying to stay as calm through all the unexpected changes that we're all going through. So thanks for your patience. Thanks for joining me. Get comfortable. Grab a cup of coffee or tea, and let's have a little conversation. I'm going to grab my notes here. I'm really excited to talk with you today. Got a lot on my mind, a lot going on, and a lot that I want to share with you in a little bit of time together. And first and foremost, I want to say congratulations, you made it. It's another Sunday, here we are. And I hope you and everyone you care about is healthy and safe, and that you're making it through as best as possible. I know for me, it's really helpful to get outside every day for a bike ride, for a walk. The spring is just spectacularly beautiful, and I even enjoy getting out when it's a little bit rainy. I notice new things smell different, and it's just as beautiful to me outdoors when we have a little bit of our spring rain. So again, welcome. Happy Sunday. Thanks for joining me. A couple things I want to talk about today. First and foremost, you have probably received your voter pamphlet in the mail. Very exciting. And I want to point out, because a few people have asked me, there are two voter pamphlets. One is put out by the City of Eugene, and it's just for races only people within the city can vote for. So our mayor, city council, and the Lane Community College bond are in that city voter pamphlet. This is the voter pamphlet put out by the Secretary of State's office, the state of Oregon, and in it you will find all of the state legislators up for re-election, as well as our federal delegation, our Congress, for the primary, for the May primary. And you'll find your local races, including judges, the utility boards, and county commissioners. So page 50 is where you'll find me. I hope you'll give it a read and share with your friends a little bit about why you're supporting me for county commissioner. The way to support me best is to vote for me on May 19th, but you got to make sure you're registered to vote to do that. Voter registration in Oregon goes through this coming Tuesday, the 28th of April. So go to the Secretary of State's website to make sure your registration is up to date. You can register when you're as young as 16. Of course, you won't get a ballot until you're 18, but you can get registered now. So register to vote by April 28th so that you can participate in the May 19th primary election. Great, thank you. I was also, I'll just say, really pleased to note when I went on the Secretary of State's website to see that the voter registration page has links in 6 different languages. And that's relevant to what we're going to talk about in a little bit this morning. Better access by being more inclusive, by having multiple languages available on the Secretary of State's website. I also want to let you know that how things are going on the campaign. We are continuing to make calls. I make calls pretty much every day to voters. First and foremost, just checking in and seeing how people in the district are doing through all of this uncertainty and these really scary times. Quite frankly, I've had some great conversations, mostly just chatting with neighbors about what it feels like to be in a shelter-in-place order, how much people are missing their people. But in particular, I had a conversation Friday, with a woman who is a respiratory therapist. And we were talking quite a bit about the long road to recovery that people who are stricken with COVID and get ill enough to require being on a ventilator, her work kicks in after people are taken off ventilators to repair and recover and really retrain their respiratory system to operate efficiently and effectively on its own. So my heart goes out to people who are directly affected by this virus, by being infected with it and being seriously ill. And thank you to our healthcare workers, and particularly I want to give a shout out to respiratory therapists who are going to help folks recover and get through this. I hope that you all are continuing to take the necessary precautions as we learn more and more about this disease and what we need to do to stay healthy and stay safe, not just ourselves, but to protect others in our communities. It's still really interesting to me to note how many people are, or in some cases, are not wearing masks out in public. I know there's been a lot of conversation about the efficacy of wearing particularly homemade cloth masks, but what I want to impress upon you is this. Yes, this virus has real and serious physical consequences, but this whole situation of being in shelter in place order also has real consequences for our mental and emotional well-being. And I think there is a huge value in helping everyone see that you understand this is serious and you want to do everything you can to protect yourself, your loved ones, and others in the community by wearing a mask when you go out in public, particularly if you're indoors, like at a grocery store or other essential errands. So please do mask up when you go out, especially if you're indoors where there are other people. Continue to be vigorous and rigorous about washing your hands and limit your contact in person with the people that you're sheltering in place with. And if you have to be in contact with others physically, to make sure you maintain at least that 6-foot distance. Thank you for doing that. What I wanted to talk about today, as I promised in the little event promo, first and foremost is we're all learning a lot of new things too, right? I learned how to cut my own hair. Homemade haircuts are a thing now, right? Really appreciate my stylist who I've been seeing for almost 10 years now. She's seen me through a lot. She FaceTime videoed with me and walked me through how to give myself a little bit of a trim, and I really appreciate that. So thanks, Marty, for that. But I want to say, I'm loving noticing on social media how so many people are stretching themselves and learning new things, and they're gardening for the first time, or they're doing a lot of baking and cooking. They're sewing. They're cutting their own hair. And I think this is wonderful. The creativity is great. But what it also makes me think about is, because there are so many kids at home from school now, what does learning look like? And I know there's a lot of stress and anxiety about whether kids might be falling behind by not being in school. So what I want to say about that is, I'm a mom. My kids are adults now. I have twin grandsons who are 14, wrapping up their 8th grade year, really sad to miss an 8th grade graduation. And they're going to pass through that huge rite of passage entering high school as freshmen in the fall. And what I want to say to you as a mom, as a grandma, as someone who's been around a lot of kids over the years is, I know it's stressful. I know you're worried, but your children are learning. You can't stop kids from learning. They are learning all the time. What they're going to learn during this really challenging time is going to be different than what they would learn if they were in school, obviously. And even with distance learning and following along certain curriculums, they're going to be learning an awful lot about emotional, self-regulation and management, and response to crisis. They're going to learn a lot about how many people reach out to help you and your family and them, or ways that they might be able to reach out and help others. But they're also going to be continuing to learn basic fundamental academics, even if they're not couched in that way, with textbooks and worksheets, right? If you're cooking at home and you're involving your children in cooking, then they're learning a lot about physics and also a basic life skill of preparing meals for themselves and the family. If you have a garden and you're working outside in the garden with your kids, that is one of the best science labs there is, to watch plants grow from seed to plant to food. Your kids may be reading more on their own. They may be doing more art, maybe playing music. All these things that we all wish there was more of in school. Now's the chance to get as much as possible of those wonderful ways of spending time and learning. So really, the best thing you can do for your kids, to the parents out there, or the grandparents or extended family members who are caring for children who would otherwise be in school during this time, is to take a deep breath. Open yourself to their curiosity and what they want to learn about, and provide as much support and resource for them to do that learning on the topics that interest them, their own way, at their own pace. And and keep supporting your kiddos in that way. It's the best thing we can all do for each other. I also want to give a shout out to the schools who have been preparing sack lunches to go. Take advantage of that. The schools have the food available. It's a nice activity if you live close to walk or bike over to your neighborhood school and have your kid grab a sack lunch. And it's one less meal that you have to make and clean up, or that your kids have to figure out what to make to fend for themselves. So please do that, and thank you to our schools for keeping up that important piece of learning readiness with good nutrition for our kids. So hang in there. You got this. We're going to be okay. And the kids are all right. So the other thing that I want to talk with you about today, as I mentioned in the event notice, I want to talk about health disparities. I've been running for this seat for more than a year now, talking about a public health equity framework. And that has become more front and center and important than ever in this time of a global pandemic with communicable disease all around us. People are understanding more and more what population-based health management can look like. But I want to talk particularly about health disparities, which have been with us for a long time and, of course, persist and are even more glaringly evident in the midst of this COVID-19 outbreak. As you probably have been hearing on the news or reading about, not everyone is at equal risk of not only contracting COVID-19, but of how the virus impacts them if they do become ill. And much of the reason for that, as we've all been hearing, is, for example, people with underlying medical conditions are more at risk or more likely to get more ill if they contract the virus. And many of these underlying conditions, things like diabetes, asthma, heart disease, well, the rates of these, we have our special guest star again this week joining us. I can't keep him away. The reason that we have disproportionate incidences of things like asthma, diabetes, heart disease amongst communities, amongst certain communities, is because of chronic, persistent, historic, institutional inequality and oppression. African Americans are far more likely to suffer from diabetes and heart disease, for example, and therefore are at far greater risk of serious health consequence if they contract COVID-19. Particularly what I want to talk about today is Black women and women in general. We have been talking on and off over the weeks on these broadcasts about how women are disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. And a lot of that is for a number of reasons. One, far more women, and particularly women of color, are likely to be in lower wage jobs. So they have far less of a financial cushion if they have to go without income for a few weeks, or the jobs that they do are deemed essential, caregiving, grocery workers, and so on. And so they're required to go to work, thereby putting themselves at greater risk once again. So these are a couple of the structural issues at play that make some of us far more vulnerable to this disease and to the impacts of it than others. I want to also talk particularly about people who are incarcerated. For those of you that have been following along and reading articles about what's happening, our prison population is one of the most marginalized and vulnerable of anyone in this country. And of course, again, because of persistent, historic, institutionalized racism and oppression, our prison population is overrepresented by people of color. It's obviously a space where it's essentially impossible for people to maintain good distancing practices if they're incarcerated. And prison staff are coming and going from the outside world and into the prison. And of course, visiting has been suspended, which, going back to what I talked about earlier in terms of the emotional and mental health impacts of this pandemic, If you are in prison and you are denied visits from the people that you care about and your connection to the outside world, that is going to have tremendous detrimental effect on the emotional health and well-being of people who are incarcerated. So they're at greater risk of contracting the illness, they have fewer protections against it, and they have that added layer of an even greater level, a far greater level of isolation from the people that care about them than the average person does. So an incredibly vulnerable population that I am gravely concerned about as we move forward in this pandemic. You know, a couple of local organizations have been doing phenomenal work drawing attention to these disparate impacts of the pandemic on the communities that they are organized to serve. And I want to give particularly a shout out to a couple of them. The NAACP has put together a really great report and a list of recommendations predominantly aimed at the city of Eugene for what city leaders can be doing to respond, particularly to mitigate the inequitable impacts on our African American neighbors. But many of those apply at the county level too. And the other organization that's done some really important work is Centro Latino Americano. They produced a study, they did a survey of service providers and Latino folks in our community to talk to them about how this is impacting them. And a couple of the suggestions that they have in here, in addition to the suggestions that the NAACP has put together, include strengthening the collaboration and the partnership across sectors, but particularly with nonprofits and government entities. And I want to say something about that. As someone who has worked in the nonprofit sector for about 25 years in our community, serving my neighbors with basic human needs, the nonprofit network in this community is so robust and so strong and so well coordinated and so committed. But even before the COVID-19 outbreak, our nonprofit networks were overtaxed and under-resourced. And I have real concerns about folks' over-reliance or assumption of the capacity of our nonprofit network to serve our most vulnerable populations in the communities. Nonprofits really should be a backstop and a last call for folks who are not able to get their basic needs met. To me, the government programs should be our front line. It is fundamentally, generally the government, but particularly our county, who is our public health authority. It is the county's obligation and responsibility to protect the public's health. And if we think that we can always count on our nonprofits to be there for us to provide food and shelter and medical care and clothing and energy assistance and help finding jobs, we're fooling ourselves. The capacity of that network simply cannot meet the need before we went into this pandemic. And I'm very concerned about the burden on the nonprofit safety net in this current time. So something I'm going to be really excited about looking at and working on as a county commissioner is how can we better set up systems to quickly and more nimbly adapt and retool some of the businesses that we already have in place. We've seen this sort of happen piecemeal and organically around, for instance, like distilleries making hand sanitizer. But if we had a coordinated, thoughtful effort ahead of time going into what are our resources, our manufacturing infrastructure, our workforce that could be quickly retooled to address basic needs in an emergency situation, we could have been much better prepared going into this and be responding much more quickly, filling the gaps and meeting needs. Again, particularly going back to this discussion about inequities and unequal health outcomes for particularly for women and for people of color, what I want to say is this. When we pitch our policy solutions to the least resourced and most marginalized people in our community, everyone benefits. So if we don't address the healthcare needs, for example, of Indigenous people, of Black and Brown people, of women, of immigrants, they will continue to be left further and further behind. There will be more human suffering. And frankly, just from a fiscal stewardship perspective, it will cost us more money as a community and as a local government to address greater numbers of sicker people. So when we create healthcare solutions that meet the needs of these more marginalized, least resourced communities, and these communities that have been historically impacted by institutional racism and inequity and disinvestment, when we pitch our responses to them and we catch them up in solutions, we all benefit as we move into the center. So I will always be a strong proponent at the table as your county commissioner to ask the questions: who will benefit from this policy? Who is potentially going to be harmed by this policy? And who was involved in informing this policy? Those are three questions I will always ask, particularly with that public health lens when we're talking about our public health programs. I have shared before, when we first moved to Eugene and were starting out, we were a struggling family with young kids, and the county's WIC program, the Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Supplemental Program, really helped us meet our basic needs for good nutrition and keep food on the table and make ends meet. The WIC program is a fundamental family support, and our maternal and child health programs at Lane County are run by phenomenally talented and committed folks, but are under-resourced. The home visiting nurses program is one of the best preventive as well as intervention health programs that the county runs. When you literally meet people where they are by sending a nurse to their home to check in to make sure baby is growing well, mom is managing, the whole family is pitching in, and everyone understands the developmental needs of the new baby, and also is an opportunity to take a look at the conditions in the household and where that family might need support. It's critically important. It saves us money in the long run, and it's the right thing to do to make sure that mothers and babies are taken care of. And we have only to look at health outcomes for Latinx moms, for African American moms, for Indigenous peoples and moms from Indigenous communities to see that they're suffering at a far greater rate of really critically important health measures for the moms themselves and for their babies in terms of birth weight, chronic disease, and hitting developmental milestones. And again, the reason for that is not because there's something inherent in these populations' ability to care for their children. It's because we have failed them in terms of the supports that we provide them. Can you imagine if we had gone into this pandemic with the paid family and medical leave program already up and running? This is a bill that just passed the last legislative session, but it will take several years to seed that fund with enough money for people to start making claims against it. This is work that started more than 10 years ago in Oregon to try to get a paid family and medical leave program in place. Can you imagine how differently we would all have been impacted by this pandemic if we had already had a robust, fully funded and supported paid family and medical leave program going into this? Can you imagine the difference if we did not have income inequality and suppressed wages, and people actually had savings for retirement, a financial cushion, and enough income going into this pandemic to meet their basic needs on their own? These are just a couple of the fundamental health and economic policies that I will push for: living wages, paid family leave, paid sick time for all workers, not just those in companies with 10 or more employees. And particularly, I will be paying attention to the systemic and institutional inequalities that are baked in to things like wage equality. So these are just some of the policies and things that I mean when I'm talking about health disparities and why looking particularly to more marginalized, least resourced communities and what solutions they need will actually end up benefiting all of us and is the right thing to do. And that's my commitment to you, to take that approach and that lens. There are many wonderful resources out there to help us all get through these incredibly challenging times. Again, if you're a parent with children at home trying to get through this, hang in there, deep breath, patience with yourself, and remember, your kids are learning all the time, and they're going to be okay. If you are someone who has a family member who is incarcerated and you want more help and resource to learn about that, you can go to ojrc.info/COVID-19 for some great helpful resources for people who are incarcerated here in the state of Oregon. Again, I want to thank and appreciate Centro Latino for calling attention to the disproportionate impacts and number of folks from the Latinx community who are being affected by the COVID-19 virus. And I want to specifically call out our farm workers and folks working to get food to those grocery stores that we're still able to go to get food on our table. Very important that we support farm workers and we never allow them to be carved out of any of these public policies that I've been talking about, such as wage equality, protecting them against wage theft, paid family and medical leave, and paid sick time, and so on. Critically important. Also want to thank our local Eugene Springfield NAACP chapter for putting their great report together with recommendations for elected officials about how to support communities of color and particularly Black families in these really challenging times. And I want to shout out again our maternal and child health program workers at Lane County for keeping mamas and babies safe. The health of our mothers and our babies and children truly are a bellwether to the health of the rest of our communities. And we have to do right by them in order to do right by all of us. So with that, I think every week I say this, I go into these thinking, how will I possibly fill half an hour? And yet the 30 minutes goes by. As we get closer and closer to Election Day, which is May 19th, I'm more and more excited and absolutely as committed as ever, not just to being your next county commissioner, but to being the first woman to represent District 3 on the county commission, and to be someone who brings this critically important public health equity framework to our decision making at the county commission. So I'm going to leave you with a reminder. I'm on page 50 of your state issued voter pamphlet. I'll be on your ballot if you live in District 3. Lots of other great candidates running this cycle. We have some phenomenally diverse fields of candidates up and down the ballot. Really excited to get mine and mark it for the candidates of my choice. And I hope you will too. And please make sure you're registered to vote. The deadline to do that is April 28th, and ballots will start being mailed out on April 29th. If you want to get involved and help the campaign, we still have a few lawn signs left that we're looking for hosts for. We're doing phone banking to outreach to voters to make sure folks in the district are safe and doing okay and have what they need, and to share a little bit with them about what I stand for and what I want to do for our communities. So you can hop on the phone and help us reach voters. You can write a letter to the editor to talk about why you're supporting me. And you can reach out to your own friends. That's some of the most important work you can do. If it's important to you to be represented by a woman with a public health framework on the Board of County Commissioners, tell your own friends. Share the Elect Laurie Trieger Facebook page. Send an email with a link to my website, which is just laurietrieger.com, with a couple of sentences about why you're supporting me. Send that out to your friends, your colleagues, your network of folks. It really does matter, because people want to know what other people think, because we are social creatures and we all miss each other during this shelter-in-place order. But it's so great to be able to be connected through means like Facebook Live and Zoom conferences and FaceTime and good old-fashioned phone calls and even a card or a letter. So make sure you stay in touch with the people you care about in whatever way you can. and take good care of yourself. Thank you so much for tuning in, for everything you're doing to support this campaign to bring a public health equity framework to the Lane County Board of Commissioners. I thank you, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your Sunday. Take good care, everyone. Please do get in touch if you have questions or concerns. I love to get your feedback. You can message me here or send an email through the website, laurietrieger.com. Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Till next week.